In the middle of a crowded dance floor, a bride twirls, white dress billowing around her hips. She looks into the face of her newlywed husband, who takes her by the hand, pulls her into his tuxedoed chest, and after kissing her lips, dips her down as her brown hair grazes the floor. The song concludes. Family and friends applaud. The music begins again around the lavish reception hall. Wedding guests are seated. Fine china, flowers, forks scraping across plates, clinking glasses, eating cake. And sitting at the head table beneath the burning chandelier, observing this immaculate moment, every single one of these perfect little scenes is the father of the bride, the master of the banquet. He smiles, removes the napkin from his shirt collar, dabs the corners of his lips, stares through the sea of people, and locks eyes with his daughter, swaying it with her husband in the middle of the dance floor. She smiles back at him, waves 3 fingers over her husband's shoulder, blows her father a kiss, and in that moment, the father's joy is complete. He can still remember back to when she was a little girl, and he made a promise that when the day came, he would give her a perfect wedding. He made a promise that no detail would be overlooked, that down to the finest little thread, everything that she wanted would come true. And now as he sees the smile on her face, the contentment in her eyes, and he sees every single element executed to perfection, he too feels a sense of fulfillment. He has given her everything that he promised. But that sense of fulfillment starts to waver, starts to tremble when in the corner of the reception hall, one of his servants starts weaving his way through the dancing bodies and tables with a furrowed brow. The servant comes to the head table, crouches down, looks up into the face of the father of the bride, the master of this banquet, and he says, "Sir, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but we've got a major problem." Problem? The master of the banquet asks, "What could possibly be the problem? I mean, look at this. The wine is wonderful. The food is wonderful. The ceremony was perfect. My daughter is having the time of her life. What could possibly be wrong?" To which the servant replies, I know, but we do have a problem. We're out of wine." And the father of the bride, he looks down at the servant. He says, "We're not out of wine. You've probably just gone through kind of the initial stock of barrels. Don't worry. I planned for this. There's a contingency number of barrels that I contain down in the cellar. Just go get those, distribute it to the guests. Everything's going to go off without a hitch." The servant, crouching before the father of the bride, master of the banquet, he scratches his head and he looks up at the master and he says, I know we have the reserve barrels down in the cellar, but we already went through those. We went through those hours ago. I'm telling you, we are out of wine." The master of the banquet loosens his tie. He leans back in his chair and he says, okay, just don't panic. I knew that some of our guests would drink a lot more and a lot more quickly than I would hope. And so I actually have the emergency reserve of wine barrels out behind the reception hall. Just go get those. Everything's going to be fine. To which the servant says, "Sir, we went through those too. I'm telling you, we have no more wine." So in this moment, the master of the banquet, he turns, he looks across the reception hall. He sees guests beginning to turn their glasses upward, the last drops of wine falling down on their tongue. And then he locks eyes with his daughter in the middle of the dance floor. He sees the smile on her face, and he sees that smile being threatened by the fact that now this wedding may no longer be perfect, and his heart begins to sink. And as he begins to think, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Someone tugs on the back of his robe. He turns, and he finds a woman with brown hair pulling it behind her ears. She says, "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. I know this is really none of my business, but I couldn't help but eavesdrop on your conversation with the servant. I was eavesdropping. I heard you have a little bit of a predicament, but I think I actually might be able to help." The master now, giving this woman his full attention, says, "What could you possibly do?" And she says, "Well, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mary, and it just so happens that I mothered the Messiah." And so she points across the reception hall and she says, "You see that man over there? His name is Jesus. He may be able to help." Mary waves for Jesus, who's in the corner of the reception hall, laughing, eating cake, talking, listening with friends and friends that he has not yet made. She motions for him. And Jesus comes dancing his way through the reception hall beneath the burning chandeliers. He arrives behind the head table. He looks at Mary and he says, "Mary, what's going on?" And she says, well, Jesus, we have a bit of a problem. They have no more wine. To which Jesus replies something so strange and odd and peculiar. Jesus says, dear woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come. Now, Jesus says a lot of weird things. He says a lot of strange things that I think sometimes we read and we go, oh yeah, that makes total sense. That's exactly what he should say. When really what we probably ought to say, if we're being honest, when we read these things, we go, what in the world is that supposed to mean? And Jesus responds to this very, very kind of simple phrase from Mary, hey, they don't have any more wine. And Jesus says this weird thing. He says, dear woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come. So what is Jesus saying? Well, I think I would be a fool and very arrogant if I told you I knew what Jesus meant. As if I could somehow encapsulate or completely comprehend the mind of Jesus. The truth is I have no idea what Jesus means, and neither does anybody else. But I do have two ideas. I think the first thing Jesus might kind of be saying is he might be going, Mary, look, I can't do this big full-scale thing here and do this grand thing that's going to draw this attention to me, because if I do, it's going to start to set in motion some events that can't be set in motion just yet. I can't do that. But I think Jesus is saying something else. And I think to understand it, we actually have to think about ourselves for a moment. See, I'm betting that none of us have ever said this phrase before, my time has not yet come. I mean, it would be kind of peculiar if a friend came up to you on a Friday and said, hey, man, want to go out tonight? I mean, what are you doing? See a movie or something? My time has not yet come. That would be really strange. Cool, but strange. So I mean, there's that reason why we would never say this, because it's just kind of an odd thing to say, but I think there's something deeper going on. And I think, like I said, to understand why we wouldn't say something like this, we have to look at ourselves. See, there's a reason we never say something like, my time has not yet come. And the reason is because we always think our time has come. It's my time to get what I want. It's my time after all this work to be recognized. It's my time after what has been weeks and seasons and months and years of hard garbage in my family. It's my time for everything to for once be easy. It's my time for the people I love to finally be healthy. Isn't it my time yet for my parents to get along? Isn't it my time, after putting in practice after year of hard work, to finally get my chance to shine? Isn't it my time yet to get what I want? See, part of the reason we would never say this odd phrase, my time has not yet come, is because we always think our time has come. We live in this thick cloud of entitlement, this fog of self-absorption. It's like we breathe it in through our nostrils, we suck it in through our mouths, and it coils around our bones and around our souls, and it convinces us from the inside out that life is all about us. It's all about you, and it's all about me. It's my weekend. I should be able to do what I want with it. It's my money. I can spend it how I want. It's my relationship. It's none of your business. It's my body. I can do what I want. It's like right in the beginning. This story I'm telling, by the way, is in John chapter 2. It's like right in the beginning of Jesus' adult life, which is when this event takes place. It's like Jesus is telling Mary and anyone overhearing, hey, this is a really self-absorbed world, but I'm telling you right now, that's not how I'm going to live. Which is crazy. I mean, it's crazy that Jesus is saying, it's not my time, it's not about me, because if there's one person who could actually say, actually, it kind of is all about me, it's Jesus. I mean, if there's one person that could say, it's all about me, it's him. And even Jesus says, it's not about me. And Jesus did this over the course of his whole life. There's a story where it's 12-year-old Jesus, which for me is one of the hardest ages of Jesus to envision. But there's a story when Jesus is 12, and he and his family go up to the temple, and so they caravan, all together like gypsies, camels, saddles, jars, and little pottery clay things clanking against each other. They arrive at the temple, they spend some time there, and then they all leave as a community. They're almost home. They've traveled all these miles, and Mary, with the dust rising into her nostrils, she looks over at Joseph, and she says, hey, is Jesus with you? And Joseph turns, and he goes, oh, I thought he was with you. And then their neighbor behind him goes, hey, way to go, you left the Son of God back at the temple. And so they turn and they all caravan back and they go in and they're looking for Jesus, and they walk in and they find Jesus in the temple, and they give him just that parent look that we all know, where your parent just looks at you and goes. And Jesus sees him standing over there doing this, And he comes over, and Jesus, for the duration of a number of hours, has been teaching all these different wise men, all these Pharisees and scholars. He's been unraveling all these mysteries that have confounded them for centuries, and Jesus is explaining it. And so then when Jesus sees them over there, he walks up, and Jesus says, hey, and they go, Jesus, what are you doing? And what Jesus does not say is, hey, didn't you know I just had to be doing my thing? Didn't you know I just had to let everyone know my wisdom? That's actually not what he says. What Jesus actually says is, why were you looking for me? Didn't you know I had to be about my Father's business? He's not saying it's about me. Even at 12, Jesus is going, it's not about me, it's about him. And so at this wedding, decades later, it's like Jesus is reinforcing that concept of Mary. He's saying, Mary, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come. It's not about me. So in response, Mary looks at the servant crouched before the master of the banquet behind this giant head table, and she says, hey, do whatever my son Jesus tells you. And so Jesus walks over, he throws one arm around the servant, and together they slither their way through the wedding guests and tables, and they get into the corner, and they kind of congregate with another handful of servants. Let's say there's 6 of them. And Jesus looks into these 6 faces, and he's like, hey, guys, I want to make sure I understand the problem. There is a problem, right? And they go, yeah, Jesus, we really need some wine. And Jesus says, can you just repeat the problem to me one more time? I want to make sure there's just no misinformation here. And they say, well, Jesus, we need wine. And Jesus goes, look, the music is really loud, and the band isn't that good, and so it's really difficult to hear in here. I just want to make sure I don't misunderstand it all. Can you repeat one more time? You need wine, right? And they go, yes. How else do we make it clear? We need wine. And Jesus says, great, fill these jars with water. Is this a good idea? This is the worst idea ever. Jesus says, you need wine, and they say, yeah, we need wine, and Jesus says, great, then fill these jars with water. And now the servants have a decision to make, don't they? These 6 individuals, they have to decide, are we going to go our own way to get what we think we need, what we think we want, or instead, are we going to listen to Jesus? But let's pause for a moment. Because this is typically, for me, where these stories in the Bible get really hard to relate to. Because the servants are kind of experiencing this really, really rare moment. They're experiencing a moment where in the midst of an ordinary day, the voice of God is literally interrupting them. I mean, they're just kind of going about like the minutia of a mundane day. They're just like, picking up plates and sweeping. And in the midst of all that, they hear the voice of God saying, hey, instead of doing what you were planning on, what if you did this instead? And I think that's what makes this part of the story so difficult to relate to, is they are actually in this moment, in the middle of an ordinary day, hearing from God. And my first question to you this week is, do you sense the voice of God in your life? Now, I want to be very clear on what I'm asking. I'm not asking if you would check a box on a survey that says you're a Christian. I'm not asking if you read your Bible sometimes. I'm not asking if you go to a Christian school. I'm not asking if you practice good morality. I'm asking you if you sense the voice of God in your life. Now, some of y'all might describe that as maybe audible. Some of you might describe it as a whisper. Some of us might describe it as kind of this mysterious wind in our soul. Some of us might describe it as an intuition. Regardless of how you describe it, my question is, do you sense the voice of God? Because I would wager that if we're being honest, and if there's anything that we should be allowed to be when gathered together, it's honest. The answer is no, we don't. And if you don't sense the voice of God in your life, that's not something you need to feel terrible about. It doesn't mean you've made some terrible mistake. In fact, I can't even tell you what that means. There could be all sorts of reasons why. But what I can tell you is that in this story, when Jesus is looking for people to whisper to, when Jesus is looking for people to collaborate with him and partner with him, when Jesus is looking for people to engage, he doesn't say, where are the perfect people? He doesn't say, where are the people that have their lives most morally put together? He doesn't say, where are the people with the best reputations? When Jesus is looking for a life to interrupt in the middle of a day, he doesn't say, where are the people who have the most talent? He doesn't say, where are the people who everyone else likes the most? Jesus says, no, 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 no. Forget all that. Where are the servants? So if you don't sense the voice of God in your life, I cannot tell you what that means, but perhaps a question to ask yourself is, am I a servant? Are you a servant? Am I a servant? Are our lives available to God, or have we in our self-absorption kind of boxed God out of having any intervention in the midst of an ordinary day? Are you a servant? It's a broad question, so let's break it down. Are you a servant? Think of it this way, something very simple. When you go out with your friends, do you think more about what you're going to get from them or what you can give to them? When you sit down with somebody for coffee or a meal, whether that be a classmate or a colleague or a family member, is your first inclination to speak, or is your first inclination to listen? Are you a servant? Speaking of listening, let's talk about prayer. I was taught this acronym. You all know what an acronym is? It's like a vertically spelled word, and each individual letter spells out a horizontal word. And growing up in a private school, which I did, I was taught this acronym for prayer. And the acronym was ACTS, A-C-T-S. And he was like, hey, this is how you should pray. And so the A was adoration. And the idea was, when conversing with God, I ought to begin by sort of praising him. God, you are incredible. God, you are mighty. God, you are majestic, all these things. And then the C in the acronym was for confession. God, I fall short here. God, I'm greedy. God, I'm arrogant. God, I say the worst things about other people. God, I'm lustful, on and on and on. The T in the acronym was thanksgiving. God, thank you for trees. Thank you for football. Thank you that I have a house and food in my belly. And the S was for supplication, which is an old antiquated word, which basically means requesting things of God. God, be with my family, be with my friends. God, help me to become the person I want to be. And it sounds like a well-rounded prayer, right? I mean, if you imagine like the dietary pyramid, like when eating, it sounds like a really well-rounded prayer. Praise, confession, thanksgiving, making requests. But here's the problem. In that dialogue, who's doing all the talking? Me. What servant do you know would go to their master and say, you're amazing about all these things. I'm sorry about these things. Thank you for these things. Give me these things. Okay, bye. See, it seems to me that the way a servant approaches their master is not with their mouth open, but with their ears open. They would go before him, and like a lot of individuals did in the Old Testament, they would either physically or metaphorically fall on their knees and say, here I am. And then they would shut their mouth and they would listen. God, what do you want to say? God, what do you want to tell me? God, if you just want me to be here in silence, that's okay too. When's the last time, if you believe in prayer, when's the last time you prayed and you didn't say a word? Are you a servant? Now, some of us do know what this is like, to be at this kind of point the servants at this wedding banquet where they're like, okay, what should we do? I don't know. I mean, maybe we should make ourselves available and do this thing that we feel pushed towards and prodded towards, and we feel that Jesus is inviting us towards. Should we do this or should we go our own way? You understand this tension. You sense that whisper of God in your life, and maybe even today, September 20th, you're having a day where you sense that tension. You sense that point of decision. Which way am I going to go? For some of us, you feel this urge in your life, this push to forgive somebody. And you've been kind of white-knuckling and holding on to this grudge or this sense of resentment or hatred. Maybe it's for a friend. Maybe it's for a former friend. Maybe it's for a parent. And you're holding on to this resentment, and you feel this whisper saying, let go. Give mercy. Give compassion. And you're holding on, and it's almost like you're saying, I feel like life is easier, more fulfilling if I hate this person rather than give them mercy. For some of us, that maybe point of decision we're at is about using a talent or a gift. In a room this size, I can't even begin to fathom the amount of dreams and imagination and talent and skills that are here. And for some of us, we feel that tension of, should I use this gift? Should I pursue this passion, or should I just kind of tuck it behind, this door, lock it, put police tape up over it, and never use it? And we feel that tension. It's like you feel that whisper. You feel maybe that nudge of God saying, use this. I gave it to you. I gave you a voice. I gave you the body that you did. I gave you the mind that you did. I gave you this vision in your head. I want you to pursue it, and everything in us is going, but what if I fail? What if it doesn't work? What if I'm no good? What if people think it's stupid? What if people disagree? How is that going to give me what I want? And I wonder if silently God wouldn't be retorting to you, I know it doesn't make sense. It's almost like I'm asking you to fill jars with water when you think you need wine. But I'm not asking you if it's a good idea. I'm not asking you how it's going to turn out. I'm only asking you if you're available right now. Y'all, I am so good at answering all the questions God is never asking. God, this isn't a good idea. Well, I'm not asking you if it's a good idea. God, I don't know how it's going to turn out. Well, I'm not asking you how it's going to turn out. I'm just asking you if you're available right now. If you're at that point of tension in one of the ways I mentioned or another, I understand. I've been there. My name is Josh Riebock, by the way. I, along with my wonderful wife of 11 years, live in New York City. I am a writer for a living. That's what I do. I write books and poetry. And about 9 years ago, I was in the Austin, Texas airport. At the time, Kristen, my wife, we were living in Austin, Texas, and I kind of have an airport ritual. I travel a fair amount for my job, and I have this ritual where I basically just go into a zone. I get on the plane, and I either just listen to music the whole time, or I tend to sleep, or I write. And I was waiting to board this plane. I had my earbuds in, and I was just listening to music, totally in the zone. And as the plane is beginning to board, I look over to my left, and I see this woman. And just at snapshot glance, I notice a few details about her. The first thing I notice is that she's all alone. The second thing I notice is that she's sitting down in the middle of the airport terminal. And the third thing I notice is that she has these kind of trio of suitcases around her like a fortress from the world. And so I see her, and then I just kind of go back to being in my zone, and I'm listening to my music, and I'm waiting for my boarding group to be called so that I can go on the plane. And for whatever reason, I take a second glance at this woman, and when I do, I notice a few more details. I notice that she's wiping her nose. I notice that her eyes are a little bit bloodshot. I can hear her sniffling, and I can see that she has moisture on her cheeks. I mean, at this point, anybody could tell that this woman was crying. And I see this, and then I go right back to my zone, and I think, I'm going to get on the plane, and that's the moment when it happens. And again, call it a whisper, call it a wind, call it an invisible hand squeezing your heart. That's the moment when I feel this tug going, Josh, you should go talk to this woman. You should go to her. And everything in me is offering rebuttals as to why I should, my plane is boarding, and I really don't like not being on the window, and I can't miss this flight. I promised some people I would be there. I've got so much work to do. And besides, men such as myself don't approach strange, vulnerable women in the middle of airports. Like, that's just not really the way it goes. And again, I just wonder if in that moment is I'm having this sort of silent argument with this tug. I wonder if God wasn't going, I am not asking you any question other than, are you available right now? I'm not even asking Josh if you'll be available tomorrow or in 2 hours. I just want to know, are you a servant to me right now? And so I'm kind of standing there, and very begrudgingly, I'm like, fine, whatever. And I take out my earbuds, and I begin walking as slow as possible over to this woman, like hoping that, some other chivalrous knight is going to gallop in front of me and beat me to her. And I finally get over to this woman, and I am standing on the outside of her suitcases, and she's sitting there on the floor, and I just reach out my hand, not like there's anything like powerful here. I just didn't know what else to do. I reach out my hand, I put it on her shoulder. And the woman, her eyes swing up at me, and she just bursts into tears. And so at this point, you're just kind of following your instincts. And so I just open my arms, and this strange woman, she stands up, and she grabs me, and she just sobs into my shoulder. And she sobs, and she sobs, and she sobs as the plane boards behind me. Now, I'll come back and tell you about her in a moment, but I want to make something real clear, especially as our 3 days together begin. I don't have very many stories like this. I don't have a whole lot of moments in my life where I was like, hey, even though I would rather do this thing because it seems to benefit me more, I'm going to put my agenda on hold for the sake of another person, to love someone, to give compassion, to step into a moment of someone else's pain. I don't have a whole lot of stories where I felt that wind blowing through me, inviting me to take a detour from the life and the day I had planned. And I said, you know what? I don't understand what the outcome will be, but okay, I don't have many stories like that because the vast majority of my life has been and continues to be simply thinking about what benefits me most and ignoring everything else, including the whisper of God. But in that moment in that airport in Austin, Texas, 9 years ago, I realized as I stood there, I don't have to ignore that whisper. There is nothing preventing me from responding. There is nothing preventing me except my own willingness. In that moment, I wanted to be willing. In that moment, knowing that I might ignore that loving and courageous whisper for the next 10 years, I wanted to respond in that moment. In that moment, I just wanted to be like the servants at that wedding. See, because the servants are all standing there in the back corner of the reception hall, right? And Jesus has just said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to fill these, and I'll finish here in a second. Jesus says, I want you to fill these jars with water, and then just takes them to the master of the banquet, and they look at each other and they go, should we do it? Should we not? I don't know. What do you think? And after some debate, they finally go, you know what? Let's do it. And so they nominate one of the servants. If this were a movie, in the credits, he would be listed as Anonymous Servant 4. He takes a cup and he looks into this big 30-gallon jar, and what kind of substance does he see? He sees water, right? And he takes a cup and he dips it in and he pulls the cup out of the jar, and what substance does he see in the cup? He sees water, and yet he goes anyway. And he's walking, he's taking this slow walk through the dancing people, through the tables, through the dance floor, to the master of the banquet, the father of the bride. He's walking to him knowing full well that he's putting his job at stake. Because the master wants wine, and if he gives him water, he's going to lose his job. He's going to lose his income. There's going to be all sorts of consequences, but he goes anyway. And so he finally rounds the bend, and he's walking behind the head table right to the master, and he looks in the cup, and he sees water. He can see the terror in his own face reflected in the surface, and that's the moment he realizes Jesus never promised to turn it into wine. Jesus never said, hey, you know what? Don't worry, because in the end, you're going to get exactly what you want. Jesus never promised to turn it into wine. He said, just take some out and take it to the master. Right now, this is a picture in the book of John. This is a picture about unconditional obedience. It's not about saying, God, I'm going to go with you because I think in the end I'm going to get what I want. It's saying, even if I don't, I'm not going because I'm going to get what I want. I'm going because you told me to. That's the only reason. I'm going because I believe deep down it's the right thing to do. And so the servant reaches the master, and he sees water, and all the servants in the back corner, they're all, believing that it's water, and so they kind of start slowly backpedaling out of the reception hall, wanting to get away from the crisis that's about to occur. And so the servant hands the master the cup, and he sees water in the cup right when he hands it to him, and the master takes the cup, and all the servants cringe, and the big wedding reception continues to go on, and the master raises it to his lips, and he brings it down, and then this little maroon wine mustache starts dripping off his top lip. The master smiles at the servant, and he says, this is the best wine I've ever tasted. And now we celebrate, right? This is where we all celebrate. And we say, it's a miracle. It's a miracle, and it is. But I think in celebrating this, we miss the whole point of the story. See, I was often told that this is a story demonstrating kind of that Jesus reveals himself, what he's capable of. And it is in part. But more precisely, it's not a story demonstrating that Jesus reveals himself. It's a story demonstrating who Jesus reveals himself to. See, there's this tiny little verse, if you read it in verse 9. And after, the master takes the drink, it says, the master did not realize where the wine had come from. But the servants who had drawn the water knew. So this is a miracle, right? But here's the question. Is it a miracle in the mind of the master of the banquet? No. It's nothing more than a great glass of wine. So he sips the wine. He goes, this is the best wine I've ever had. And rather than going, Jesus, who are you? I want to know more about you. I want to engage with you. He says, this is the best glass of wine I've ever had. And he goes right back to the wedding. It's a miracle, but it's not a miracle to the master of the banquet. Is it a miracle to the wedding guests? No. Who's it a miracle to? Only those who made their lives available to him. In the moment they see it's wine, you know what they do? They recoil, their souls shudder, and they go, who is this guy? And they tremble, and they talk about it, and they're changed, and they leave, and their lives are different forever. This is not just a story about substance being changed from one to another. It's a story that's telling us, be careful, because self-absorption will blind you to the wonder of God right in your midst. If you are too inward-focused, if I am too inward-focused, if I refuse to make my life available to God, I render myself blind to the beauty right in front of me. It's like the master has no idea that the wonder of God is just an arm's length away. You know, it's interesting about the woman in the airport, and I'll close with this. You know, she held me for a long time, and she sobbed for a long time. And when she finally let go, we sat down. And we talked for a little bit. And when she had been able to compose herself, I asked her, I said, what's wrong? You know, what's going on? And she looked at me and she said, you know, my dad just died, and my family lives in Chicago, and so I got to fly home to Chicago and be with my family. And, you know, there's a great honor in being able to mourn even just for a moment with somebody else. But what this woman didn't know, what I did, obviously, that just a couple weeks earlier, my dad had died, and my family lived in Chicago, and I had to make that exact same trip. And I knew exactly what that felt like. And you know, we're free to interpret the events of our lives as we choose, and so maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was God whispering to me, Josh, I haven't forgotten about you. I haven't forgotten your pain. And if you are going to be willing to step in to this moment with me, you will be reminded that other people too understand it, and in that your pain will be lessened. But if I had just stood there in line and boarded that plane like 99.9% of the time I do, I would have missed so many of these wondrous whispers of God that were right in my midst. Where do you need to make your life available? Are you a servant? Let me pray. God, thanks for this day. Thank you, God, for interacting with us. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I can't explain it. But God, help us to see where we are missing you. May we not just settle for great glasses of wine. May we be people who, even when it doesn't make sense and even when we don't understand the outcome, who are willing to have our lives momentarily derailed to collaborate in what you're doing in your name. Amen. Thanks, y'all.
Seniors.